Okay, so get this. About a century ago, Argentina was like the sixth wealthiest nation on the planet, up there with the US and Great Britain, a total economic powerhouse, right?
Wow, yeah.
But now today, they're dealing with inflation at over 200%. It's a crazy fall from grace, and that's what we're diving into today. How did this happen? And what is this new president, Javier Milei, doing to try to turn things around?
Yeah, it's wild. Argentina's economic history, I mean, it's a total roller coaster of booms and busts.
Yeah.
But this new approach Milei's taking has definitely got everyone watching.
Yeah.
I'm going to unpack the historical context, look at the reforms themselves. And what's really interesting is why Argentinians are actually supporting these pretty drastic measures, even with, some real hardships.
To understand how they got here, we got to rewind back to the 20th century. Imagine a country going through 7 military coups.
Oh, way.
That's the level of political instability we're talking about. And then on top of that, you have the rise of Peronism, this left-wing populist movement that really shaped Argentina's politics. Now, this isn't a deep dive into political ideologies or anything like that, but we do need to understand how Peronism, with its focus on isolationism, protectionism, and a huge welfare state, how did that impact their economy?
Yeah, for sure. These policies, they were meant for social welfare, but they also added to this, web of regulations, and over time, that really dragged down their economic growth.
And the regulations, I mean, you wouldn't believe some of them. Our sources even mentioned, a rule that horses had to wear hats in sunny weather.
Really?
Yeah, it sounds crazy.
Wow.
But it shows how much the government was, messing with the economy, right? Stifling innovation and making them super vulnerable to any economic shock.
And those shocks definitely hit. We're talking repeated financial meltdowns, hyperinflation, wiping out people's savings almost every decade.
It's crazy.
Think about it. How would you plan for your future if you knew your money could just disappear overnight?
Yeah, you can't.
It creates so much uncertainty.
And it's not just some abstract economic theory, We're talking about real people struggling to buy groceries, businesses closing down, this feeling of instability everywhere. The sources pointed out some of those major crashes like '89 and 2001, they had huge impacts on everyday Argentinians.
Yeah, for sure. And that 2001 default was a big one. They defaulted on $100 billion in debt.
Wow.
It was the largest sovereign default in the world at that point. And get this, since then, they've defaulted 8 more times.
8 more times?
Including as recently as 2020. It's not a good look for investors, They're understandably wary of putting money into a country with such a volatile economic history.
Oh, of course. And then we have to talk about inflation. By 2023, it was at a crazy 211%. This isn't just a number. This is prices for basic stuff skyrocketing, people's buying power shrinking, widespread social unrest as people are just trying to get by.
It's a recipe for disaster, yeah.
So you have decades of economic mismanagement, external shocks all coming together. And then into all of this walks Javier Milei. Not your typical politician.
No, not at all.
He's what's called an anarco-capitalist. Maybe some people listening haven't heard that term before.
Probably not, no.
So help unpack that a little. What does it actually mean?
So it's this really fascinating and pretty controversial political philosophy. It's all about minimal government and maximum individual freedom. Think of it as the belief that the free market, without a lot of government interference, is the best and fairest way to allocate resources, even to provide things we usually think of as government services.
So basically no taxes, no regulations, no social safety net. Seems pretty radical. I mean, who builds the roads and schools?
That's one of the big questions, and even among anarco-capitalists, there's a lot of debate about how those essential functions would work in a stateless society. Some people think it would be private contracts and voluntary associations handling things like infrastructure and education. Others have even more radical ideas like seasteading, creating communities at sea, or using blockchain tech and crypto to make new forms of governance.
Wow. Okay, so just to be clear, Milei isn't saying he's going to completely dismantle the government, is he?
Right, he's not. Milei is often described as a pragmatic anarcho-capitalist. He knows that those really radical ideas probably aren't totally doable in the real world, at least not right away. It seems like his goal is to shrink the size and power of the government, but not get rid of it completely.
Okay, that makes sense. And it's not just his ideology that's getting attention. This guy loves a spectacle. Chainsaws, superhero costumes. It's like a movie.
Oh yeah, he's definitely a showman.
He is.
But it's his platform that really connected with voters and got him elected.
Plus.
He talked about chainsawing government spending. Pretty vivid image, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And his plan included getting rid of the huge welfare state that was really ingrained in Argentina's society. These aren't small changes. We're talking about overhauling their whole economic system.
And he didn't waste any time once he got into office. We're talking swift action. He slashed the number of ministries, cut social programs, fired tons of government workers. It was like a whirlwind of reform.
It was. And those reforms definitely had consequences. One immediate effect was that the Argentine peso dropped in value. Now, devaluation, it can be good and bad. On one hand, it makes Argentine exports cheaper for other countries, so that could help their industries.
Right.
But on the other hand, it means Argentine consumers are paying more for anything imported.
So cheaper Argentine wine for the rest of the world, but more expensive electronics and imported stuff for people living there.
Exactly. And then there's the budget surplus Milei achieved. It sounds good, right? Like responsible budgeting.
Yeah.
But you have to understand how he did it. It wasn't from more revenue. It was mostly through austerity measures, big cuts to government spending, which then has ripple effects on things like social services, education, infrastructure.
So a budget surplus sounds good in theory, but in reality, it often means less government support for important things.
Exactly. It's a trade-off. You have to think about who's really impacted by those choices.
For sure. So let's look at some specific examples of Milei's reforms to see how they're actually working. One big one was getting rid of rent controls in Buenos Aires. The results were pretty dramatic. The number of available apartments tripled, and rents went down about 50%. Sounds good for renters, right?
Well, it depends on who you ask. More apartments and lower rents, yeah, that seems positive. But our sources pointed out that this also had some unintended consequences. Some people argue that it actually pushed out a lot of lower-income residents who just couldn't afford to live in those neighborhoods anymore.
That's interesting.
So while some people celebrated the changes, others were priced out of their homes.
It shows how even reforms with good intentions can have complicated results that you might not expect. What about some other examples?
Okay, so another big change was getting rid of import licensing schemes. This was supposed to cut down on bureaucracy and make the market more competitive. What happened? Home appliances dropped 35% in price, and imported clothing went down 20%. These were things that consumers really felt in their wallets.
So cheaper washing machines and clothes, I can see why that would be popular. But I bet not everyone was happy about this deregulation, right?
Right, of course not. Consumers might love lower prices, but domestic businesses, especially those that relied on protectionist policies, they were suddenly facing a lot more competition from foreign companies.
Makes sense.
It raises some questions about whether local industries can survive in the long run. And what about job losses if they can't compete?
That's a good point. It's that tension between free market ideas and wanting to protect local jobs and industries. What else did Milei change?
Well, he also went after the airline industry. He stopped protecting Argentina's state airline and opened things up to international carriers.
So more competition.
Yeah, the goal was to create more competition and maybe lower airfares. Still early to say if that actually happened, but it's a big change that could really reshape the aviation industry in Argentina.
More choices for travelers, but we'll have to see how it affects prices and the state airline itself. Any other reforms that stood out?
There's one that's pretty controversial. Milei brought in AI and facial recognition to monitor protests.
Like something out of Minority Report, right?
Yeah, exactly. And privacy advocates are definitely worried. It raises questions about security versus civil liberties and whether this technology could be used to silence dissent.
It's a powerful example of how technology can be both exciting and unsettling, right? Especially when it comes to government surveillance.
For sure. And speaking of government spending, there's this interesting thing. While he's cutting everything, Milei somehow found $300 million for new fighter jets.
Really? Why would he prioritize that?
It seems contradictory, but there could be a few reasons. Maybe it's strategic, to strengthen Argentina's defense and project this image of power to the rest of the world. It could also be a way to keep the military happy during all this economic change. They're a powerful force in Argentine politics, It's a decision that deserves a closer look, especially with all these austerity measures happening.
So even with a budget surplus, not everything is being cut equally. They're making choices about where to spend money, even with austerity.
Exactly, yeah. Which brings us to the big question. What's the overall impact of all these reforms? It's complicated, as you might expect.
Is Argentina's radical experiment working?
Well, the early data is mixed. The good news is inflation has gone down a lot, but it's still high compared to the rest of the world.
So progress, but not a total solution.
Right, people are still feeling the effects. And the data also shows some worrisome trends. Argentina's GDP has shrunk, meaning the economy is contracting, and poverty rates have gone up a lot.
Imagine poverty doubling in just a few years. That's a huge burden for millions of Argentinians.
It is. It's the double-edged sword of austerity. It can help stabilize things in the short term, but often at the cost of people's well-being.
It's a tough balance, and it's interesting that there hasn't been a massive backlash against Milei's policies, even with all this hardship. Argentina has strong unions, but they've been pretty quiet. Why is that?
Our sources say there are a couple of reasons. First, there's just a sense of fatigue, of desperation among Argentinians. They've gone through decades of economic chaos, and a lot of them are willing to give Milei a chance, even if it means some pain now, if there's hope for a better future.
Hope for change.
Exactly. And second, it seems even the unions realize they played a part in creating this mess. Years of pushing for higher wages and benefits without increases in productivity. They know that contributed to Argentina's economic problems.
So there's a sense of shared responsibility.
Yeah, I think so. And what's really surprising is Milei's approval rating has actually gone up since he took office. It's now at 56%, higher than any of his predecessors.
Wow, that's pretty remarkable. It seems like people are willing to endure some pain now if they believe it's leading to real change.
It's like what they call let the madman get on with it in political science. When people are really fed up with how things are, they'll take a chance on something radical, even if it's risky. They're basically saying, we've tried everything else, let's see what this guy can do.
It's the power of hope, even when things are tough. People want a leader who can show them a different path, a way out of the economic problems they've been stuck in for so long.
And Milei, with his bold ideas and unusual style, he's tapping into that desire for change. Whether it'll actually work, we don't know yet. But one thing's for sure, he's got everyone's attention. And this story is far from over.
Definitely a story we'll be watching closely.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a pretty fascinating story, right? Like, we're watching a whole country try to change its economy and society. And the impact could go way beyond Argentina.
You're right, it's not just about them. The whole world's kind of watching this experiment with, I don't know, maybe a mix of curiosity and a little bit of nervousness. So what's really at stake here? Why should we be paying attention?
Well, for one thing, Argentina is a major player in the global agricultural market. They export a lot of grains, soybeans, beef, all sorts of stuff. So if their economy gets even worse, it could disrupt food supplies all over the world, and that means price increases, affecting everyone.
So what happens in Argentina doesn't stay in Argentina, especially when it comes to food. That's a ripple effect that we'd all feel.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then there's the financial side of things. Remember all those defaults we talked about?
Yeah.
Well, if Argentina defaults again, it could really shake up international financial markets, potentially triggering something like the 2008 global financial crisis, that kind of domino effect.
So a lot depends on Milei getting their economy stable. This isn't just a local story. It could affect global markets, even the price of groceries in other countries.
It shows how connected the global economy really is, and how what happens in one place can have big consequences everywhere. And there's another part of the story we haven't really touched on yet, the ideological battle that's happening on the world stage.
You mean the whole anarco-capitalism thing? Is this like a test case for that ideology?
In a way, yeah. People who support and critique free market economics are watching closely. If Milei can pull Argentina out of this economic mess, it might encourage other leaders to try similar things. It could lead to a whole new wave of economic liberalism, governments getting smaller, less involved in the economy.
So this could be a big moment for free market supporters all over. They're hoping for a success story in Argentina.
Right. But on the other side, if this fails, if Argentina gets worse under Milei, it could really hurt the credibility of those free market policies. It would give more power to the people who want more government control, more regulation, maybe set back economic liberalism for years.
Wow. So the stakes are high, not just for Argentina, but for how we think about economics globally. It's like a real-time experiment in economic philosophy.
And it's happening at a time when people are already unsure about traditional economic models. The pandemic, the war in Ukraine, the cost of living going up, all of that has added to this feeling of unease, of uncertainty.
Yep.
People are looking for answers, for new solutions.
Yeah.
And some are drawn to Milei's radical ideas, even if they don't agree with everything he says.
He's offering something different, and that's appealing to some, even if it comes with risks.
He's tapping into that frustration, that feeling that the old ways aren't working anymore. Whether his vision is the right one, we don't know. But he's shaking things up, and that's resonating with people.
It's almost like a political thriller, right? The outsider comes in, promises to change everything. Will he succeed, or will it all fall apart?
It's definitely a gamble. There's no guidebook for what he's trying to do. Argentina's had so much economic and political turmoil, it's hard for any leader to break that cycle.
He is.
But Milei's approach, even though it's radical, it seems like he understands Argentina's economic problems. He's not just guessing, he has a plan, even if it's a risky one.
So it comes down to execution, right? Can he actually put these reforms into practice, overcome the challenges, and create something sustainable?
That's the key, yeah. Good intentions and big ideas aren't enough. He has to show he can turn those ideas into action, get real results.
And keep the public on his side, which might be tough if they don't see things getting better.
Exactly. That honeymoon period doesn't last forever. At some point, people will want to see those results. He has to convince them that this is a real path to a better future.
Speaking of hardship, we've talked about the economics, but what are the social and political effects of these reforms?
Those are important too.
Mm-hmm.
For example, getting rid of price controls has led to more competition, lower prices for some things, but it's also made it harder for poorer families to afford the basics.
Right.
And the cuts to social programs have made that even worse, leading to more poverty. It raises questions about who's really benefiting from economic growth.
It's that classic dilemma, right? How do you balance economic growth with fairness? Can Argentina have a strong economy without leaving people behind?
That's the challenge Milei faces. And it's not just about economics, it's about a cultural shift. For decades, Argentinians have been used to a certain amount of government help.
Yeah.
Now they're being told to rely more on themselves and the free market. That's a big adjustment, and it creates winners and losers like any big change.
So it's not just changing policies, it's changing how people think.
Exactly. It's about rewriting the social contract, and that takes time.
And politically, how's Milei handling all of this? Is he still popular? Is there any organized opposition to his reforms?
It's a dynamic situation. His approval ratings have gone down a bit lately, which makes sense with all the austerity measures.
Yeah.
But he's still relatively popular, which suggests people still trust him. They still have hope.
So they're giving him a chance, but that patience won't last forever.
Right. He needs to show some results, and he's definitely facing opposition. The traditional political parties, labor unions, activist groups, they're all pushing back, saying his agenda is too extreme, too disruptive, and that it hurts the most vulnerable people.
That's the classic debate, isn't it? Free markets versus government intervention.
Exactly. And it's happening all over the world, not just in Argentina.
It's a reflection of how divided we are about these ideas.
And Milei's experiment is just adding fuel to that fire. Both sides are watching, using what happens to support their arguments.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating, but also kind of scary thing to watch.
Like watching someone walk a tightrope without a net.
And the question is, can he make it to the other side? Or will he fall, bringing Argentina's economy down with him?
That's the big question. Feels like we're right there with them, watching it all happen. Argentina's economy hanging in the balance, and everyone's watching.
The stakes are huge, not just for them, but for the global economy too. Maybe even for how we think about economics in general. It's a lot for one country to handle.
It is. You know, you mentioned earlier that Milei got some ideas from India. Like that rule to speed things up, cut down on bureaucracy. Seems like that could be helpful anywhere, really.
Yeah, it does make you wonder, could this kind of radical approach work in other countries that are struggling? Could they get the same results? Or is Argentina a special case?
It'd be nice if there was a simple answer, right? One magic formula to fix any broken economy. But it's probably way more complicated than that.
Oh, it definitely is. There's no one solution that works everywhere. Every country's different, you know? Different challenges, different politics, different history. What works in one place could be a disaster somewhere else.
So even if Milei succeeds, it doesn't mean other countries can just copy him. But maybe there are still lessons to be learned, things we can take away from watching this, no matter what happens.
Exactly. Whether Milei's reforms work or not, Argentina's story will be important for economists, for policymakers, for anyone who wants to understand how these different economic ideas play out in real life.
It's like a real-world test of economic theory, and the results could affect how we think about government and the economy for years to come.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one big question this all brings up is the balance between individual freedom and collective responsibility. Milei is all about individual liberty, free markets. But people say that comes at a cost, that it hurts social safety nets and people who need help.
It's a debate that's been going on forever, right? How much should the government be involved in the economy? How much regulation is the right amount? How do we balance economic growth with being fair to everyone?
Those are tough questions. And there's no one right answer. It depends on the situation, on what a society values.
It's about finding the right balance.
Exactly. And that balance probably changes over time, too, as things change.
It does.
And it's not just about policies. It's about having a culture of responsibility. People taking responsibility for themselves and for each other, realizing that we're all connected and what we do affects everyone.
So even if we don't know how things will turn out in Argentina, there's a lot we can learn from them.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that economics isn't just some abstract idea. It's about people's lives, their hopes, their struggles.
It's about making the world better for everyone.
And Argentina's story is a part of that. This story that's still going on, and we'll be watching to see what happens.
I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today. Argentina is a fascinating case study. It brings up important questions about economics, politics, the future of our world. We'll definitely be following this story.
You too.
So to our listener, as you watch this unfold, ask yourself, what can we learn from Argentina? How does it change how you think about the world? It's something to think about. And maybe it's even a call to action, because the future isn't just something that happens, it's something we build together.